What is going on, Hawks Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Hawks Fan TV. I'm your host, AC, and I hope you guys are having a great day out there so far. In today's episode, we are going to be breaking down what we've seen so far from our Hawks. We're starting off 6-9, not the best record. Obviously, a lot of us are surprised at us being below 500, me being one of them. So a lot of fans, including myself, did not anticipate a 6-9 start. However, we are 2-0 in our last two games. Average margin of victory at home these past two games have been 19 points. So we're slowly starting to look like the old Hawks of last year, which is an encouraging sign. Our offense looks good. Trae Young is doing Trae Young things. But we cannot, take away from that road trip. Okay, that road trip was horrendous, and elite good teams do not go 0-6 like that on the road in consecutive games. So we're gonna break that down so far, what we've seen in the season, what we like so far from these past two games, where I predict these Hawks are going to land by the end of the season, some predictions on playoff seeding, and maybe some potential trades coming before the deadline. Now, before we get into today's episode, I do have a very special guest with me today, and that is my good friend DeShaun Tate at Tate Hoops. He is a multi-level basketball analyst and reporter. He also covers our Atlanta Hawks as well. So he's going to be joining today's show and really just giving his opinions and his breakdown on what we've seen from our Hawks so far. So I want to welcome in my man, DeShawn. DeShawn, how you doing, sir?
Man, I'm outstanding, Alex. I do appreciate you just for sharing this space with me and just your platform, excuse me, all across the board, and just reaching out to me, seeing some value in some of my content and knowledge and my passion that I like to share with a lot of different people. So I do appreciate that much more than you know, and I'm really happy to be a part of it, of the program.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. The pleasure is all ours, and thank you for your time. So DeShawn, we're going to get right into the episode today, okay? Our Hawks, we are 6-9. We are fourth in the Southeast Division, and we are, if the playoffs start today, we are not even in the play-in. So obviously, luckily for us, it is a full 82-game season. We've only played 15 games into the season so far, which is only 18% if my math serves correct. So still a lot of basketball to be played. But before we get into that, let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? This West Coast road trip, we were 0-6. It started with the Nets, then we lost to the Jazz, the Suns, the Warriors, the Jazz again, and then the Nuggets, all by pretty significant margin. Okay, so a lot of these losses came from double digits, and we just looked like a lottery team. What did you see from that road trip, DeShawn, that was surprising and maybe raised some red flags for you on this team?
Well, let me say this first and foremost, because as you know, I'm sitting here at home and kind of doing the dog sitting thing. So if you hear a little bit of barking in the background, don't want to mess up your program, but that's just because the dog gets excited when we start talking about Hawks basketball. Now that we got that part out of the way, just a couple of the takeaways and things that I've seen on that road trip. First and foremost, I know people are going to go all crazy about this stuff, and people has been kind of going crazy, especially here within the metro Atlanta area. Having higher expectations from a team that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals on last year. They didn't just play any teams out west. Okay, let's get that out of the way first. They didn't play the Kings and the Pelicans and these ones, and that wasn't the case. They played teams that are going to contend. I'm not sure if anybody right now has a better record than the Golden State Warriors. If so, I know that they're somewhere close to the top. The team that just went to the NBA Finals in the Phoenix Suns and a few others as well. That's not even including some of the other teams that are still going to be really good and competing as well. So that's the first thing, okay? And that's not an excuse or this and that. That's just the reality. This is a team that knows that they have to compete and then have expectations to go out there and win games. Nobody's thinking that you're going to put up a bagel against the teams once you jump on that bird and go out west. There was a little bit too much. And I think this is what we're seeing, something a little bit different that we're seeing now that they're on a 2-game winning streak. Because when they were on that 0-6 losing streak, one thing that I did notice is they were outscored each and every single game, okay, when it comes to the bench production. that part was really concerning for me, because if you do have all this depth that the Hawks have, and arguably or inarguably the deepest team in the NBA from a talent standpoint, on paper or without, from top to bottom, the consensus would agree that the Hawks are somewhere near the top in that particular category. You have to be able to make that account for something. So we didn't really see much of that. There were some instances where I thought they could have shot better from the charity stripe. That's a free space. It's like what I like to call a free space on the Tate's Take bingo card. Nobody's running out there at you on that particular shot. It's just you and the goal. Nothing standing in between. And they didn't really shoot all that well on some of those games. So I think that those are some different areas in which they can improve. Defensively, I think is really, really huge for this team, because as everybody knows, as I was taught at a very young age, that, offense sells tickets, or offense, wins games, but the defense is what wins championships. As soon as you get to a point where on the defensive side of the ball that you can establish some, the offense will come later. It's not often that you see high-powered offense and then the defense comes later. You have to establish that defensive presence first. We know that they're a much better team than they were around this time a year ago at that, before they made the transition over to Nate McMillan, and he's a defensive type of player. He teaches. That's the strategy. That is the scheme that he has put in place for this team. They have to continue to improve in that area and continue to out-rebound teams. So I know that may sound like a lot. Keep cutting down on the turnovers. Guys run healthy. Not an excuse in the world. But I do think that over time, those things come together. And guess what? And I'm going to say this last part and let you get to your next question. I'm sorry I get a little winded and,
I love it.
And over talkative, but I'm just passionate. Okay, the reality is this. This is not only a team, but even players within the franchise that we have seen looks much better in the second half of the season versus the first. That's not an excuse about how bad that they've been in the first half of the season, but just like Trae Young's, let's just say, for example, prime example, rookie year, looked like a totally different player in the second half. The team looked like a totally different team in the second half. Cam Reddish's rookie year looked like a totally different player in the second half than he did the first half. The team looks like a totally different team last year in the second half versus the first half, once they got, past the injury bug and things like that. So from that standpoint, I still like to think, keeping fingers, toes, eyes, and everything else crossed, that this is going to be a team that, once they begin to continue establishing that chemistry between one another, that I think that they'll be okay in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And I think the biggest takeaway, especially in that road trip, DeShawn, because obviously this was early in the season. It still is early in the season, but the road trip was even earlier into the season. And it's really, players finding out, building up that chemistry. Nate McMillan obviously working out the kinks in the rotation. This is the first time that, we've had a fully healthy roster ever, really. So, obviously we saw a lot of, the full bench lineups on the road trip, and Nate McMillan playing the entire, second lineup together at the same time. Obviously it didn't work. And the good news is, we're slowly starting to see, Nate fix up his rotations. He's been staggering the rotations these past couple of games, and then shockingly, those have resulted in 2 wins back to back. So hopefully this is an eye-opening experience for him, but also just the players themselves building up that chemistry and getting assimilated with that new Nate McMillan offense that we've been practicing all offseason. Obviously, before the Bucks game, the Hawks were the #1 leading mid-range shooting team in the league, which is crazy because of how we played all last year, where it was very pick and roll heavy, getting into the lane or shooting a lot of 3 balls. So it was almost the complete opposite of what we've been seeing that led us to the Eastern Conference Finals. So we're slowly starting to see that Hawks team from last year coming back, which is a refreshing sight to see. Speaking of a refreshing sight to see, our Hawks are now 2-0 in these last 2 games we've played at home. We have 3 more home games coming up. But this Magic and Bucks game, we've won, by 18 points and then 20 points against the defending champs, respectively. What were some positives that you took away from those 2 games that resulted in those 2 wins, and what looked different from this Hawks team?
Well, first of all, the bench production, as I alluded to at the beginning, seeing guys step up, stand in the gaps, step in. One of the things that I really wanted to see more than anything all season this season, and I get it, when it comes to guys like DeLon Wright, whether he's the right answer or not, no pun intended. I just wanted to see more Lou Williams. I mean, that's just something I wanted to see. There was times when I thought during that stretch of those 6 games that they look a little flustered and needed somebody in which why you have Lou Williams, not just because he's instant offense off the bench when it comes to high octane shooting, high volume shooting and things of that nature, but also to be able to get the guys together collectively, calm them down, be the guy that sets the tone, be the guy that sets the pace. Trae Young, as good as he is, he's still a very young player. Again, no pun intended. Needing somebody like that in your locker room, excuse me, that can demand that of the guys, that can get them to say, hey, we've been here before. This isn't the time to start getting out of character. This isn't the time to be jawing back and forth with referees and so forth, or different players and, pointing fingers and doing all these other things. That's something that is needed. That's something that's necessary, but it's totally different as, yesterday, being in the post-game press conference, listening to guys like, Trae Young and Nate McMillan, say, hey, we're a totally different team when he comes into the game. And I tend to agree with that. So I think that that's a huge piece of it. Another piece is just, Nate McMillan also had talked about the substitution, in terms of, getting Trae out of the game a little bit earlier, giving him a chance to assess what he has not necessarily done wrong, but where he can be better. But from an earlier point in the game, because they have that depth, that's something that they can do, and a game manager, which is a compliment within itself. Talking about DeLon Wright, and giving Trae a chance to actually see what it looks like from the bench at a totally different time during the game than he's actually used to. So I think that in a lot of ways, that's something that has certainly helped, I like to think. And giving him an opportunity to view things from a totally different perspective. So those are just a couple of my key takeaways, and that's something that they've been doing over the course of the last 2 games. And ultimately, I think that that's one of the reasons why we are seeing them now, even if it is just a 2-game winning streak, adding a number to the left side of the result column.
Absolutely, that's the most important thing. And I'll be honest, I'll be the first one to admit, DeShawn, I was one of the few conservative fans last night, and I was expecting a loss. I thought, we came off a nice win against the Bucks. It was the defending champs. Guys were playing inspired, motivated basketball, and then, off a back-to-back, we historically have not looked that good. And then, of course, we were going up against, the Orlando Magic. So I thought our young team would maybe, succumb to their level of the opponent and maybe come out flat. But that was not the case. This was actually, in my opinion, one of the most impressive wins of the season so far, because it was off a back-to-back. It was against a, young, high energy team like the Orlando Magic, and we just took care of business, and we did exactly what good teams are supposed to do, and we blew them out. So it was very encouraging to see. And like you said, we got to rack up those W's on the left side of the column. That's the most important thing. And I think the most refreshing thing that we've seen from these past 2 games is our players that we expected to be good are slowly starting to look like themselves again, right? So we obviously, and I was the harshest critic on players like Clint Capella and Bogdanovich early in the season, because they looked terrible, right? DeLon Wright looked terrible. He at one point he was getting no playing time for like 3 or 4 games consecutively, and all of us were like, yo, what's going on? We brought in this vet for to play those backup point guard duties, but slowly these past few games, even against the what was that team we lost to on the very last road trip? But even in the last 3 games, this team has looked really solid. Our players, especially our vets like Clint, Bogey, Gallinari, they're slowly starting to look like the old versions of themselves. And as soon as these guys start clicking and the rest of this team plays to their normal ability, I think this is going to be a very dangerous team. JC, Trae Young, they're already looking like they're in midseason form, so I'm not even worried about them. But it's these other guys that have kind of been lacking, and it's encouraging to kind of see both the rest of the squad elevate their play to really match what JC and Trae have been doing. So that's encouraging. We have the Magic, or not the Magic, we have the Celtics tomorrow night, and then the Hornets right after that, DeShawn. How do you anticipate these next 2 games going, and what's your prediction?
In terms of the game against the Celtics, I mean, listen, They're going to be pumped up, ready to come into Atlanta. A very feisty team, obviously, and looking to, improve upon their record, because as they stand at 7-7, right at 500, that's not Boston Celtics basketball. That's not the Boston Celtics way. You don't walk into their gymnasium, into their arena, and look up and hurt your neck by counting how many banners are tied up there. And so you better believe that these are games that they very much feel like that they have to win. This is a Hawks team that's coming in and playing in the spot last year in the postseason, of which we typically would based on history and tradition only, maybe, are used to seeing the Boston Celtics in that spot. While they're still trying to figure out things between Jason Tatum and this guy and that guy and Brown and so forth, I'm sure Marcus Smart's going to be right there, ready to mix it up a little bit, trying to play some of those mind games with Trae Young, as I think we've seen him do before. And then what happens when you don't have a guy like a DeAndre Hunter to put on either one of those two players, talking about Brown and Tatum. So ultimately, I think that we will see a win for the Atlanta Hawks, and that's what we're pulling for, obviously. A non-biased pick also on top of that, but I think that they are starting to click. Following that up, is a game against the Charlotte Hornets, which I think is another win. This is the time for the Atlanta Hawks to kind of flex their muscles and get on a win streak. They talked about coming into the season, talked about, throughout the season so far, over all the games have been played, about protecting home court, and that's one of their goals and dreams, aspirations of things that they want to accomplish as a team this year, going into the playoffs, is having home court advantage. That starts now. So, the days of being non-competitive, and I say this all the time, you probably heard me say it a couple times, the days of, just, selling tickets to social outings and swipe left Tinder night and got plush couches to come out and have social gatherings.
Don't remind us, DeShawn.
By the way, there's a basketball game being played here, but never mind that. Those days are over. Okay, now is about the time to come out, be competitive, win the games that you're expected to win the games against the teams that are of equal competition than you, which could sound like maybe like the Boston Celtics. I think that that's somewhat fair. If we can assume that teams like, the Orlando Magic, Cleveland Cavaliers, some of those other ones, the Washington Wizards, are a step below the Atlanta Hawks, but those teams are a little bit more even-keeled to an extent. More like the Boston Celtics. Go out there and win those games. And if you don't do anything else, compete against the teams that you need to compete against. Even though they didn't do that against those West Coast teams, still compete against those. This is one that we're going to see within the next 24 hours or so, that the expectations is to win those games. If you're the Atlanta Hawks and you want to show that you belong, you want to show that last year wasn't a fluke, and I know that that's what a lot of the media and other major networks are running with, ESPN, I believe that this is where you have to step in, stand in the gap, and say, we're for real, this whole thing wasn't a fluke. And it started with the beginning of the season, but you can't. There's a reason, Alex, why the windshield is much larger than the rear view mirror. I'm glad you want to know why I say that. Well, this is why I say that, because you have to focus on looking forward. You can't go back into the past, put yourself in a time machine and all that, and change anything that has transpired up to this point. You have to be able to just stay focused on the task at hand and the big picture. That big picture is the Boston Celtics in the next 24 hours, and I think they'll take care of business and then follow that up with another victory to follow and go on a 4-game win streak going into the game against OKC.
Absolutely. And, I think the silver lining in all this is obviously, we lost 6 in a row on the West Coast road trip, but those were against Western Conference teams. Now we have some time not only to make up some ground on the win column, DeShawn, but these are against Eastern Conference opponents. So it's going to be kind of a double whammy if we win these games to peg the Celtics and the Hornets lower in the standings while we gain some ground. So these are absolutely critical games, and it's almost silly to say that these are must-win games, DeShawn, because this is so early in the season. But in my eyes, I almost consider these next 2 games at home almost must-win games, given how we started this season. So, am I crazy to say that?
No, absolutely not, and that's why I made the analogy or the comparison about the windshield in the rear view mirror. Is because what you don't want to do is say, "Oh, we have more," it's a lot more basketball to be played, which is true, but you don't want to have that mentality, or you tend to let off the gas, or maybe don't have an edge or a chip on your shoulder the same way that you came into it with the season. Oh, we can afford to drop a game or two, and then before you know it, you go from 14 games to 24 games, and 24 games to 35 games.
Exactly.
Before you know, oh, we still got plenty of time. Then you're in a crunch situation where you're playing into the playoffs or whatever the case may be. You say, oh, well, if we only won those games against the Celtics, if we only won those games against, Oklahoma City Thunder, if we only played, you don't want to worry about that. You worry about that at a later time. Right now is the time to make sure that you don't have any regrets, and making sure that you're not looking back and saying, hey, it shoulda, coulda, woulda, or if. My if analogy, there is no if analogy if I'm the Atlanta Hawks. If grandmama had coconuts, she'd be granddaddy, but she doesn't. So make sure that those apple pies is nice and warm and fresh when they coming out of that oven on Thanksgiving Day coming up in the next week or so. Control what you can control, and control your own destiny. And that's something that the Atlanta Hawks have a chance to do, but it starts right now.
Absolutely. Well said. And to all the viewers and listeners out there, if you like those little analogies and those little gems, DeShawn has plenty of those. So y'all make sure to tune in for more videos with DeShaun Tate in there. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head, DeShawn. We can't take these games for granted because the East is the most competitive that we've seen, in probably over a decade at least, that come to recent memory. So every little game counts, and we saw even last year, we had the same record as the Knicks, but they were the ones that got the 4 seed because they had the tiebreaker over us. So these games are critical. And luckily for us, I think we're starting to really find our stride on offensive end, and that's going to translate into some good wins. Now, outlook, as we project the rest of the season here, what is your prediction, DeShawn, for where the Hawks finish when it's all said and done, and how far do you see us going into the playoffs?
Well, I say this much. Besides the fact that I think that there still does need to be some questions answered in terms of who to give this many minutes to and so forth, I think that's something that Nick McMillan is still working on. But outside of that, in terms of postseason, I'm looking at a comfortable, somewhere right around the same 5 seed, a potential 4. I think is where they max out at. No, however, I will preface it by saying this: I called the Atlanta Hawks last year a 7. I think I said a 7 seed. At very best, they get super lucky that they're a 6 seed, but it's going to be very, very hard to do that. And they shocked me. They shocked a lot of people coming into the season that I know are diehard Hawks fans, announcers, broadcasters that live and die by Atlanta Hawks basketball. And so I could be very wrong. I hope that I'm very wrong. But right now I have them at a comfortable 5. And I really hate to be the person that says, oh, the Hawks are going to do this, or oh, the Hawks are going to do that. I don't know those matchups. I don't know the injury updates. None of us do, and I guess that's why you're asking me, because that's what makes it so fun. But those are ones that are always a little bit on the tougher side for me. So what I will say is I will lock in the Atlanta Hawks for the second round. That's what I feel the most comfortable saying right now. A lot of that kind of pending on the matchups and obviously some of the deals that could potentially get made leading up to the playoffs. But right now, that's where I feel. Obviously, it's subject to change. But that's where I have the Atlanta Hawks right now. If not anything else, certainly advancing to the second round. But I'll tell you what they better do. They better make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, because that is the growth. I don't think it's the end of the world if they don't make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think they have bigger concerns if you don't get out of the first round. And that's almost saying no matter who they play. Keyword almost. But you get to where you got to last year. And that's obviously the step in the direction of being on the upward trajectory of where you have to be or consider yourself mentally to be, going forward for the following year, to follow it up last year with, showing that you have that ability, you have the depth, you have all the tools, all the pieces that you need and what's necessary in order to do that. So I think that that's where at least that they need to be. Right now, I'm just not sure if I want to pull my Sharpie marker out and put them in that slot to say NBA Finals or Eastern Conference Finals just yet.
Completely understandable, given the start, especially that we've had 6-9. So hey, it's always nice to be objective, and that's why I invited you on the show, DeShawn. So somehow.
I'll say this real quick, Alex. I'll say this last little part before you start to transition a little bit. I say that for another reason. Keep the expectations low. It's harder to disappoint that way. You know, when you overpromise and underdeliver, high expectation, that's when it becomes a little bit more of an issue. It's a great thing that people aren't running around screaming at the top of their lungs, standing on the mountain, talking about the Atlanta Hawks is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or it was a fluke, or whatever. Stay modest, stay humble, continue to prove people wrong. And I think that's the best mentality for the Atlanta Hawks. Don't worry about all the negative comments and what people are saying and tweeting and texting and all the newspaper clippings and things of that nature. Just continue to use that as motivation, inspiration, and determination.
Absolutely, and I think you're preaching to the choir too. I know the mindset for a lot of these Hawks fans or players, never too high, never too low mindset, and I think that's one of the ideologies that Nate McMillan has instilled in this team and amongst this young set of players. So I absolutely think this is a good group, and like you said, whether we're on a losing streak, don't get too low. If we rip off 10 straight wins starting now, that's great, but we got to be even keel and just keep doing our thing, and I think we have the right group of guys to really do that. So yeah, that's really it for today's episode, DeShawn. I really appreciate you tuning in today and giving your opinions and outlook so far for the team and what we've seen. Before I let you go, could you please let all the viewers at Hawks Fan TV, let them know what you're working on, where they can find you online?
Sure, I'd love to. At Tate's Take Hoops on Twitter, all social media platforms. That's TATESTAKEHOOPS. We like to call it where basketball lives. Don't save the conversation for the local barbershops. Don't save the conversation for the local sports bar. Everybody has a voice here on the platform. Tate's Take. We do Tate's Take Tuesdays, typically at 6 o'clock each and every single Tuesday. So I'm getting ready to ramp that up here pretty soon. And, we like to call it the best, the most entertaining, the most informational, and the most educational basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. So feel free to find it anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. I'm always grateful and thankful for those that are praying for me. Always grateful and thankful for all of those subscribers and people that, like you, that just find value in my expertise and in my passion as well. So I think that's primarily, for the most part, that's it for me. Like I said, find it anywhere. It's a little bit of everywhere: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Red Circle, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker. Also, feel free to download the Flow channel. It's called the Flow Television. You can find a lot of my work there in the sports section on your Fire TV for the Fire Stick. You can also find it there on Roku as well, Apple TV, the whole nine. So it's all over the place. And I appreciate you for opening up this stage and this platform, this floor, and giving me an opportunity to educate some people just a little bit. Doing a great job, Alex.
Appreciate that. And you heard it there, everyone. You can find his show and his content damn near anywhere that you can find anything at. So, it was an absolute pleasure, DeShawn, having you on the show. I'm sure this will not be your only appearance on Hawks Fan TV. So as the season goes on, I'm sure we'll have many other episodes with you in it. And hopefully we'll be doing a lot of these shows in the postseason too. DeShawn, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a guest on today's episode. Very much appreciated.
No doubt. Thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks. Have a good one.
You as well.
Well, there you have it, guys. That was my man DeShaun Tate. You heard him at Tate's Take Hoops, and he's a great follow on Twitter. He's got a YouTube channel. I'll link all that in the description below. But yeah, guys, that's really it for today's episode. We were on a 6-game losing streak. We snapped it, And now let's start this winning streak, guys. I'm gonna just show you this real quick. Our next few games, like we discussed, we got Boston and Charlotte, then Oklahoma City Thunder. These are all home games, and these are all games that we should win, guys. Let's be honest. Now, I will say, out of the three, I think Charlotte is going to be the toughest game of those three, but nonetheless, we should still come out with the W. Oklahoma City is an easy win. San Antonio should be an easy win. Grizzlies we should beat, and then of course we got the New York Knickerbockers, and then at the Pacers. So, guys, I mean, these next 5 games are going to be critical, right? If we win these next 5, that means we're on a 7-game win streak. We're over 500, and we're right there in the thick of things, guys. So, really want to appreciate you guys tuning in as always. This is, Alex from Hawks Fan TV. If you have not followed us on Twitter yet, I don't know what you guys are doing. At Hawks Fan TV on Twitter. We do weekly shows for pre and post game live shows on Twitter Spaces. So if you guys want to be part of the show, be a part of the community, interact with other Hawks fans from all around the world. We have people from the UK, people from Belgium, people from the US, from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west, everywhere. We're worldwide. Would love to have you guys on the show. So follow us, check us out on the website, www.hawksfantv.com. We have daily news, rumors, and updates every single day on the website. So thank you guys for tuning in today's episode. That's going to be it for today's show. And, we'll see you guys later this week. Go Hawks.